You know that moment in the tackle aisle when you pick up a lure and for half a second, you're sure this is the one? It has painted gills, little glass eyes, a finish that flashes blue when you tilt it under the store lights. On the package, there's a largemouth bass with its mouth open like it made a terrible decision. And then you look up. There are hundreds more. Frogs with rubber legs, spinnerbaits like tiny helicopters, crankbaits painted like candy, soft plastics in colors no worm has ever been. They all seem to be making the same promise. Tie me on, cast me out, and something down there will believe. But that's the strange part. The fish has never seen the package. It doesn't know the brand. It doesn't care what cost $12 and what came from the discount bin. It's living in a world where light fades by depth, sound moves fast, smell spreads in threads, and a tiny pulse in the water can mean food, danger, or nothing at all. So choosing a lure isn't really choosing an object, it's choosing a lie. And the best anglers aren't just asking, what lure looks good to me? They're asking, what would a fish believe right now? Picture a largemouth bass tucked beside a fallen tree in stained water. It's not swimming around like a cartoon predator. Most of the time, it's budgeting energy. It watches the shade line. It feels bluegill flicking nearby through its lateral line, that row of pressure sensors running along its body. Before its eyes fully lock on, its body has already felt movement. Then something comes past. If it moves like a strong, healthy bait fish, the largemouth bass may let it go. Chasing costs energy. Missing costs more. But if that thing wobbles too wide, bangs into wood, pauses, darts, then hesitates, suddenly it looks less like prey and more like an opportunity. That's the first secret. A lure doesn't have to be perfect. Sometimes perfect is worse. Fish usually strike when several clues line up at once: size, depth, speed, vibration, color, and timing. Miss the important one, and even a beautiful lure feels wrong. Match enough of them, and a painted piece of plastic becomes lunch. That's why Match the Hatch has survived from trout streams to bass boats to saltwater beaches. But it doesn't mean copying every detail. It means matching the detail the fish is actually using. A trout in clear, slow current can inspect a fly drifting over its nose. If the real insects are tiny, pale mayflies and you throw something big and flashy, that trout may refuse it like it read the receipt. But a striped bass crashing anchovies in dirty surf isn't doing art criticism. It may only need a slim shape, a flash, and the feeling of something trying to escape. Same trick, different lie. The next clue is depth, and this is where many lure choices fail before they ever have a chance. A lake is like a building with invisible floors. Bluegill might be tucked in shallow weeds. Shad might be suspended over deep water. Crawfish might be crawling along rock. A largemouth bass holding 12 feet down may not care about your perfect topwater lure unless it's willing to rise 12 feet and spend the energy. Sometimes it will. Often it won't. So the first practical question isn't color. It's where is the fish? If fish are feeding against the surface, a popper or walking bait works because it disturbs the ceiling of their world. If they're suspended, a jerk bait or swim bait can hang in their face. If they're glued to bottom, a jig or soft plastic suddenly tells the more believable story. A lure at the wrong depth is like knocking on the wrong door. Then comes speed. Cold water slows fish because most fish are ectotherms. Their body temperature and metabolism follow the water around them. In cold water, a lure racing past can look less like food and more like a bad investment. That's why a suspending jerkbait can be brutal in early spring. You twitch it, then stop. It just hangs there, slightly crooked, slightly helpless. That pause isn't dead time. That pause is the sales pitch. In warm water, the opposite can happen. A largemouth bass may smash a buzzbait burned over grass or hit a lipless crankbait ripped free from weeds before it has time to reconsider. The lure isn't persuading with detail. It's triggering a decision. This is where anglers make a sneaky mistake. They change lures when they should change the retrieve. A crankbait crawling steadily across rock tells one story. The same crankbait deflecting off a stump and stopping tells another. A worm dragged along bottom is one animal. Hopped sharply, it becomes something escaping. Swum above grass, it becomes bait fish. One lure can tell several lies. Your rod tip is the accent. Now color, the thing everybody wants to start with. Color matters. Just not as much as the tackle wall wants you to think. Underwater, light gets filtered. Reds and oranges disappear quickly as depth and stain increase. Blues and greens travel farther. In muddy water, even bright colors can collapse into silhouettes. In clear water, fish may see more detail, but that also means they can see more things that look suspicious. So the rule is simpler than the color chart. In clear water and bright sun, go natural. Silver, shade, translucent baitfish, green pumpkin. In dirty water, low light, or heavy cover, create contrast. Black, white, chartreuse, June bug. Black at night sounds wrong until you think like a fish looking upward. Against a faintly lit surface, black can make the cleanest outline. It isn't bright to you. It's readable to them. And readable beats pretty. Then there's vibration. A spinnerbait doesn't just flash. To a fish, it pushes water. A round Colorado blade thumps. A willow blade flashes and slips through grass. A rattling crankbait can announce itself in stained water. A silent crankbait can be better when the water is clear, or when pressured fish have heard the same plastic rattle all weekend. This is when fishing starts to feel less like shopping and more like translation. A vibrating jig isn't just a bait fish, it's a panic signal moving through grass. A jig isn't just a crawfish, it's a compact meal dropping into a place big fish already want to sit. A frog isn't always a frog. Sometimes it's a bluegill, a mouse, or just something trapped and vulnerable on top of matted weeds. Fish don't read labels, they read conditions. One of the clearest examples came from a Finnish fisherman named Lauri Rapala in the 1930s. He watched larger fish target wounded minnows, then carved a small plug that didn't just look like a minnow. It moved like one in trouble. That uneven wobble became the idea behind one of the most famous lure families in the world. The breakthrough wasn't beauty. It was weakness. Predators are constantly doing math. Can I catch it? Is it worth the energy? Will I expose myself? A lure that suggests an easy meal can beat a lure that simply suggests a meal. But there's a catch. The best lure is not always the most realistic. It's the right level of obvious. In clear water with pressured fish, you whisper. Smaller profile, natural color, fewer rattles, longer pauses. In muddy water, wind, current, or low light, whispering disappears. You need profile, vibration, contrast, and a slower path so the fish can find it. That's why one angler can say a lure is useless while another swears by it. They may both be right. They used it in different worlds. Now zoom out from the lure to the day itself. At dawn, low light gives predators cover. Fish often move shallow, and a topwater walking across a point can feel almost unfair. As the sun climbs, those fish may slide into shade, deeper water, docks, grass, current, or wood. At noon, the loud surface bait that worked earlier may be the wrong story, while a jig skipped under a dock suddenly makes sense. By evening, edges wake up again. Shadows stretch. Bait fish move. Insects fall. The shoreline that felt empty at 2 o'clock can seem alive by 7. Season changes the script too. In spring, many fish move shallow to feed or spawn, so lures that cover water or irritate fish can shine. In summer, shade, oxygen, vegetation, and bait location become the puzzle. In fall, predators often follow bait fish, so moving lures come alive. In winter, slow and precise usually beats loud and heroic. You're not choosing one magic lure, you're choosing the best clue for the chapter the water is in. So make the decision smaller. First, pick the zone, top, middle, or bottom. Second, read the mood. Are fish chasing, neutral, or buried in cover? Third, read visibility. Can they see it, or do they need vibration and contrast? Fourth, read the food. Baitfish, crawfish, insects, frogs, worms, or whatever has fallen in from the bank. Answer those and the giant tackle box gets smaller. Clear lake, sunny day, largemouth bass suspended near baitfish. A natural jerkbait or small swim bait makes sense. Muddy pond after rain, fish tight to shallow wood. A dark jig or thumping spinnerbait gives them something they can find. Trout sipping tiny insects in slow current? A giant flashy spoon is speaking the wrong language. Saltwater fish blasting bait on top? Speed and profile may matter more than the exact shade of silver. Here's the deeper shift. Lures don't catch fish because they're attractive. They catch fish because they fit a decision the fish was already prepared to make. That decision might be hunger. It might be aggression. It might be territory. It might be reflex. A largemouth bass snapping at a bed bait may not be eating at all. A pike slashing at a spoon may be reacting to flash and motion. A trout refusing your fly isn't being picky in a human way. It may simply be locked onto the exact size, drift, and rhythm of the real insects passing overhead. So when a fish ignores your lure, it isn't rejecting you. It's rejecting the story. Change the story. Make it deeper, slower, smaller, louder, more natural, more visible, more wounded, more annoying, more like the food that is actually there. And when you finally catch one, treat that fish as evidence. Was it shallow or deep? Did it hit on the paws? Was the lure touching bottom? Was it near grass, rock, shade, current, wood, or open water? Was the strike violent, or did the line just feel heavy? One fish gives you a clue. 2 fish suggest a pattern. 3 fish make you look like you knew the answer all along. That's what experienced anglers mean when they talk about patterning fish. They're not randomly casting until luck happens. They're collecting evidence from every cast, every follow, every missed strike, every bump that might have been a rock or might have been a fish changing its mind. The lure is only the question. The bite is the answer. So the next time you're standing in that aisle, staring at painted eyes and rubber tails, the wall should feel different. Not smaller exactly, but less mysterious. You're not looking for the prettiest lure. You're not looking for the one that catches fishermen first and fish second. You're looking for a tool that reaches the right depth, moves at the right speed, gives off the right signal, and looks enough like an opportunity for that water, that weather, that season, that hour. A lure is a tiny piece of theater dropped into an alien world. And somewhere below the surface, a fish is making a calculation older than boats, older than tackle boxes, older than every sunrise spent tying knots with cold fingers. Is that alive? Is it weak? Can I catch it? Is it worth it? Choose the lure that makes those answers line up, and the lake stops feeling random. It becomes readable. The cast is still a cast. The waiting is still waiting. The fish still gets a vote. But now, when your lure disappears into the water, you know what you're really sending down there. Not plastic, not metal, not paint. A believable mistake.